when Officer Mike Dawson handcuffed a black man for looking suspicious outside his own police station. He didn't know he'd just arrested his new boss, the incoming police chief. The morning sun barely broke over Ashford, Pennsylvania, casting shadows like prison bars across the police station parking lot. Coffee steam rose from paper cups. Engines cooled in their designated spots. It was the kind of quiet Tuesday that felt safe, predictable, forgettable. Officer Mike Dawson pulled into his usual space. 15 years of routine settling into his bones like muscle memory. He expected nothing more than patrol reports, maybe a traffic stop, lunch at Tony's Diner where everyone knew his order. But routine dies fast when assumptions meet reality. Across the lot, a black man in his late 50s stood beside a silver sedan. Phone pressed to his ear. Sharp charcoal suit. Leather shoes that caught the early light. Everything about him spoke of authority, success, belonging, everything except his skin, which in Officer Dawson's mind made him exactly the opposite. The man's name was Marcus Williams, though no one at Ashford PD had met him yet. Chief Marcus Williams. His appointment had been announced 3 weeks prior. First black chief in the department's 70-year history. His official start time, 8 a.m. He'd arrived early, wanting to observe before stepping into the role that would make him the most scrutinized person in the building. 28 years he'd served in Chicago PD. 28 years of being twice as good to get half as far. Passed over for chief twice despite exemplary records. Commendations stacked like evidence of excellence that somehow never quite proved enough. When Ashford's mayor called offering the position, Marcus knew the odds. Small-town department. Aging force. History of complaints buried in filing cabinets. But he'd spent his entire career walking into rooms where he wasn't wanted, standing firm in spaces designed to make him small. Today would be no different, he thought. He was wrong. Dawson noticed the car first. Out-of-state plates. Expensive model. Black man in a suit that probably cost more than Dawson's mortgage payment. Just standing there, talking, existing in a space Dawson had claimed as familiar territory. 15 years of what he called instincts kicked in, pattern recognition his training sergeant had praised, never acknowledging it was just profiling dressed in professional language. This guy didn't fit. The precinct didn't get visitors this early. The neighborhood was cop families, people who belonged. This man, despite the suit, despite the calm phone conversation, despite doing absolutely nothing wrong, screamed doesn't fit in Dawson's mind. Or maybe he screamed something else entirely. That Dawson's world was smaller than he wanted to admit, that his instincts were just inherited prejudice with a badge. The whisper came, as it sometimes did. Dawson silenced it. His partner, Officer Jenny Carlson, climbed from their patrol car, following his gaze. 3 years on the force. Still young enough to question, but trained enough to stay quiet. You know him? Dawson shook his head, jaw already set. Nope. And I know everyone around here. He started walking, hand resting on his belt in that casual threat posture cops perfect. Not on the weapon, but close enough to remind everyone who holds power here. Jenny hesitated. Something in her gut twisting wrong. But Dawson was already halfway across the lot, and silence felt safer than speaking up. She pulled out her phone anyway, thumb hovering over record, just in case. Excuse me. Dawson's voice cut through Marcus's phone conversation like a blade through fabric. This is a police facility. Can I ask what you're doing here? Marcus glanced up, reading the entire situation in half a second. The tone, the posture, the subtext louder than the words. He'd heard this question 1,000 times in 1,000 variations, in 1,000 parking lots, stores, sidewalks where his presence required explanation. He lowered his phone, ending his call. Good morning, officer. I'm here for work. Dawson's eyes narrowed, scanning the suit, the car, back to Marcus's face, building a narrative that had nothing to do with evidence. Work? What kind of work brings you to a police station at 7:30 in the morning? The kind that starts at 8, Marcus replied, voice carrying that careful calm he'd learned by age 12, de-escalate. Don't give them ammunition, stay alive. But he wasn't 12 anymore, and he was tired of shrinking. Dawson stepped closer, invading the invisible boundary cops use to assert dominance, to make civilians step back, submit, remember their place. I'm going to need to see some identification. Marcus studied him. The dance was familiar, choreographed by decades of the same encounter. Show ID immediately. You validate their suspicion that you're required to prove you belong anywhere, that your existence needs documentation. Refuse, you're difficult and non-compliant, and the situation escalates toward violence. He'd taught this exact scenario in training seminars, breaking down how implicit bias transforms routine encounters into confrontations that end in handcuffs or worse. And here he stood, living the case study. His father's voice echoed from childhood, from the day they pulled him over for the third time that month. Never let them make you small, son. You stand tall, you hear me? Always tall. Officer, Marcus said carefully, each word deliberate, I don't believe I'm legally required to provide ID for standing in a parking lot. Truth, stated without aggression. But Dawson's face flushed red, authority challenged. You're loitering on police property. That gives me reasonable suspicion to request identification. Reasonable suspicion of what crime? Across the lot, Jenny shifted, phone now recording discreetly. She'd seen Dawson do this before, push civilians, especially black and Latino men, harder than necessary, treat requests like orders, turn encounters into escalations. She'd never said anything. Silence was easier, safer. But something about this man's composure, the way he stood his ground without aggression, made shame creep up her throat. You being difficult? Dawson snapped, volume rising. I asked you a simple question. Show me your ID or I'll assume you have something to hide. Marcus's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. And I gave you a lawful response. I'm not required to provide identification without reasonable suspicion of a crime. Standing here isn't a crime. Suspicious activity is. Suspicious how? Because I'm black and you don't recognize me. The words hung in the morning air like smoke from a fired weapon. Jenny flinched. Officers who'd been watching from windows suddenly found other places to look. Coffee to drink, reports to file. Anything to avoid witnessing what they knew was wrong but wouldn't stop. Don't. Dawson stopped himself, but the pause said everything his mouth wouldn't. I don't care what color you are, he continued, the lie obvious in his tone. I care that you're refusing a lawful order from a police officer. Last chance, ID now, or you're going in cuffs for obstruction. Marcus had learned by 12 which officers would listen, and which had already decided guilt. Dawson had decided before he'd crossed the parking lot. Officer Dawson, Marcus said, reading the name tag, voice quiet but carrying steel. I am not obstructing anything. I am standing in a parking lot, harming no one, waiting to begin my workday. If you arrest me for that, you better be prepared to explain it to your superiors. You threatening me? Dawson's hand moved to his cuffs, but something in Marcus's unshakable calm nagged at him. Not threatening, just certain, like he'd been through this 100 times and knew exactly how it ended. But Dawson had made the call. The guys were watching from windows. Backing down now would look weak, and in cop culture, weakness was worse than being wrong. I'm advising you that this encounter is being recorded. Marcus gestured slightly toward the building where security cameras angled toward the lot, and that your actions will have consequences. Doubt flickered across Dawson's face for half a second. But pride, that toxic pride built on years of unchecked authority, of never being questioned, never being wrong, wouldn't let him retreat. Turn around. You're under arrest for failure to comply and suspicious activity. Mike. Jenny's voice came out small but steady. This doesn't feel right. He's not doing anything illegal. Stay out of this, Carlson. That's an order. The look he shot her could have melted steel. Jenny bit her lip. Phone still recording, hating herself for the hesitation between documenting this and stopping it. Marcus didn't move. You're making a mistake. Last warning. Turn around or I'll make you. The parking lot went silent. Inside the precinct, faces appeared at windows. Sergeant Linda Hayes, a black woman with 19 years on the force, watched from the second floor. Phone already dialing the captain. She'd heard rumors about who was arriving today. And if this was him, Dawson had just ended his career. Marcus slowly turned around, hands visible, movements deliberate. He'd watched friends, relatives, Strangers subjected to the same humiliation. Each time, he'd promised himself he'd change it from the inside. Now, being cuffed in front of the department, he was supposedly felt like the cruelest joke the universe could tell. You have the right to remain silent. Metal cuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists, the sound echoing across the lot, final and cold. Marcus felt that bone-deep exhaustion that came from always being watched, always having to prove, always needing to be perfect just to be seen as human. His father's face flashed. 30 years ago, hands cuffed against a wall for the same suspicious activity. Never let them make you small, son. Marcus straightened his spine. They wouldn't. Not today. Anything you say can and will be. Officer Dawson. Stop. Stop right now. Captain Raymond Torres burst through the precinct doors, jacket half on, his brown face twisted in horror, moving faster than his 58 years should allow. Dawson froze, cuffs half fastened. Captain, I've got a suspicious individual who refused. That's Chief Marcus Williams, you goddamn idiot. Torres's voice cracked with fury. The words hit Dawson like a physical assault. His hands went numb. The cuffs, half fastened around Marcus's wrists, suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. Around them, the world tilted. Officers' faces blurred into a carousel of shock and judgment. What? The whisper barely escaped Dawson's throat, but he'd already heard, already understood. His career had just ended. Our new chief, the man who's supposed to take command in 20 minutes. Marcus turned his head slightly, meeting Dawson's eyes. What Dawson saw wasn't anger or triumph. It was worse. Disappointment. Profound, bone-deep disappointment that said this is exactly what I expected, and it's still crushing. Behind him, Jenny's hand flew to her mouth, tears already forming. She'd known it was wrong. She should have stopped this. Captain Torres, Marcus said quietly, can someone remove these cuffs? Torres fumbled for his keys, hands shaking with fury and embarrassment. Chief Williams, this is unacceptable. It's certainly something, Marcus agreed, rubbing his wrists once freed. He straightened his suit jacket, dignity intact despite everything. Officers poured from the building, drawn by commotion. The morning shift, arriving for duty, stopped in their tracks, sensing catastrophe. Dawson stood frozen, brain struggling to process the magnitude. This wasn't just a civilian he'd humiliated. This was his boss, the chief of police, the man who controlled his career, his evaluations, his future. Chief Williams, Dawson stammered, voice cracking. I had no idea. You had no idea I was the chief, Marcus interrupted, tone measured but cold. But you had every idea I was a human being standing in a parking lot. That should have been enough. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Some looked away, ashamed. Others watched with expressions Dawson couldn't read. Sympathy, satisfaction, anger, all mixing into judgment. I was just doing my job, Dawson said, desperation bleeding through. You were doing what you've been allowed to do. There's a difference. Marcus turned to address the assembled officers, voice carrying across the lot. I am Chief Marcus Williams. What just happened is exactly why I'm here. He paused, letting silence work. Officer Dawson didn't see a person. He saw a threat. That changes today. The weight settled over them like fog. Chief, please, Dawson began, but Marcus raised a hand. I don't want your apology right now. Officer Dawson, what I want is for you to understand something. He paused, ensuring every officer heard. If you had known who I was, you would have been polite, deferential, maybe asked if I needed help. But you didn't know, so you saw a threat. The question you need to ask yourself is why. Why did my skin color and presence trigger suspicion instead of curiosity? Why did my refusal to submit to an unlawful request feel like an attack on your authority? Dawson had no answer. His world, where his instincts were always right, where his badgeman control had shattered. Chief Williams, I'll handle Officer Dawson's suspension and... Torres began. No suspension. Not yet. Marcus surprised everyone. He looked at Dawson directly. You're going to report to my office at 9 a.m. We're going to have a conversation about implicit bias, constitutional rights, and what it means to serve all members of this community. Then you're going to attend every diversity training, every community engagement session, every reform workshop I implement. You're going to learn Officer Dawson, or you're going to leave. The choice is yours. Dawson nodded mutely, shame burning through him. And Officer Carlson. Marcus turned to Jenny, who jumped at her name. You're coming too, because standing by while injustice happens makes you complicit. Silence isn't neutral. It's choosing the side of the oppressor. I should have said something sooner, Jenny whispered, tears streaming. I knew it was wrong. Yes, you should have. But at least you're here now. That's where change starts. He addressed the crowd once more. This department has a choice. We can continue operating the way we have, pretending incidents like this are isolated, or we can do the hard work of change. Communities like Ashford deserve better. Every resident deserves to see a badge and feel safe, not afraid. The silence that followed was heavy with discomfort, reflection, and for some, the first stirrings of change. Sergeant Hayes stepped forward, extending her hand. Welcome to Ashford, Chief Williams. It's about damn time someone said that. Marcus shook it, a slight smile breaking through. Thank you, Sergeant. I have a feeling we're going to work well together. As the crowd dispersed, officers returning to duties with much to think about. Torres walked Marcus toward the building. Chief, I'm deeply sorry. Dawson will be held accountable. He will. But accountability isn't just punishment, Captain. It's growth. Officer Dawson gets one chance to prove he can learn. One. Torres nodded. Understood. And the security footage. Already flagged for the training archive. This moment becomes a lesson. That's how we change. As they reached the precinct doors, Marcus paused, looking back at the parking lot where minutes ago he'd been in handcuffs. The morning sun had fully risen, bathing everything in light that felt almost symbolic. He thought of his father, of the rules he'd been taught, of every black man and woman who'd been profiled, arrested, harmed, or killed because someone with badge saw them as threats instead of humans. This moment, humiliating as it was, had given him something powerful. Undeniable proof of the problem he'd been hired to fix, and the moral authority to fix it without compromise. Ready to start your first day, Chief? Torres asked. Marcus straightened his tie, squared his shoulders, and walked through the doors of Ashford Police Department. Not as a suspect, but as the chief. Ready. Let's get to work. How many interactions like Marcus's happen every day, where people of color are presumed guilty until proven innocent? What would you do if you witnessed something like this? Drop your location in the comments and tell us, have you seen this happen? And if you believe respect should never depend on rank or revelation, hit that like button and subscribe for stories that prove dignity isn't negotiable. Because sometimes the most powerful lesson comes not from revenge, but from grace under pressure and the courage to demand better. Officer Dawson learned that authority without wisdom is just power without purpose. Chief Marcus Williams proved that the strongest response to prejudice isn't anger. It's unwavering dignity and the refusal to be made small. If this story moved you, share it. Change starts with awareness, and awareness starts with stories that make us uncomfortable enough to act.